Now, OpenAI for developers is an important thing when you build this stuff. Azure OpenAI is one way to get to this. So there's always a lot of confusion around that. There's OpenAI, you can go to openai.com and you can sign up for their APIs. And this is one way of using OpenAI as a developer. And it's a perfectly feasible way that'll have a lot of uses. Another way to use OpenAI as a developer is through Azure. Azure OpenAI is essentially very, very similar to the OpenAI SDK used directly, but it's through Azure. So it comes through your regular Azure account. And this is the important thing, it adds all the Azure features. So security, managing things you do, how you pay for it. But also in the future, it'll not just be about running a chat client, because that's a silly little tech demo, but it's making it as a core piece of your platform, and that will then have to integrate with all the other Azure things like databases. And it's not OpenAI's business to provide a cloud that does that. They just provide the AI piece, that's the large language model, or DALL-E and a few others, but not all the other stuff around. So we are mainly using Azure OpenAI because you have to integrate all these other things, and that's the huge benefit you get. But if you have a scenario that's just directly using OpenAI, and that's fine, that's perfectly viable as well. So when you sign up for Azure OpenAI, and just bring up my browser really quick, you then get things like the OpenAI Playground. And this is essentially giving you access to the underlying technology that's behind a lot of this large language model stuff. So when you go to chat.openai.com, it really is just, like I said, a tech demo for things that are going on behind the scenes. This is another way to get at it with a little more information. So I can go in here and I can say, this is my usual example, I'm climbing up the apple tree and I am picking Anne, and then I can let it run. And this invokes the large language model the same way you do when you go to chat.openai.com and you see here that it answered in a single word, which normally it doesn't, by the way. Normally it's wordier. But I can control it a lot more here. So for instance, I set the system message or system prompt where I can say, hey, behave like this. And that's really what happens behind chat.openai as well. So it allows me to fine tune this here more directly. And I can set other parameters like the temperature. Temperature is a measurement of how much randomness it adds. Like, does it answer apple or orange if the probability of those two being correct being very, very close. And the other thing is I can go in here and I can view the code that it would actually take if I wanted to call this as an API, because this is just a playground for developers that allows me to experiment with something that I would normally do from within my application. And I can then go in here and say, okay, well, I'm a Python developer. Here is the code it would take to do exactly what I just did from Python. Or I'm a C# developer, and here's the code it would take to do that as a C# developer, and using the OpenAI client SDK and so on. So, that's a good way to get into it. And there's a lot to it. There's the different parameters you can set. You also do things like different deployments. What is a deployment? A deployment is basically the setup of your model. So as you can see here, I deployed 4 different models. Well, what does that mean? Well, as it turns out, ChatGPT isn't just ChatGPT. There's actually many different models behind it that are useful for different things. So if I wanted to write a Sherlock Holmesian novel, I will probably use ChatGPT 4 Turbo, which is the most capable model, but also the most expensive to run. If I needed to just tokenize a piece of text, which is a way to turn text into a numeric representation of itself, I can run a very, very cheap and old model. If I wanted it to generate code examples like GitHub Copilot does, I'd use a Codex model, for instance. And so there's many different models. They have different characteristics and capability and pricing. And that's a question that was just asked. How do you estimate what this is going to cost you? Well, what you do is you pay for this by the token. When we create something, like say a completion here. Completion is, there's 2 different things. You do chats, which is a lot of back and forth, or you can do completions. Completions is just, here's some text completed. Chat is really repetitive completions. But in any event, you can come in here and you can start playing with this and you can put in some text. Well, this text results in a certain number of tokens. It actually gets turned into tokens, and you can see down here how many tokens this text is that I just put in here. How does text convert into tokens? That tokens are a vector math based representation of the text, and there's no, it's not like 5 characters turn into a token. But if you think syllables, that's not exactly right, but it gives you a good idea of what it is. And so all this stuff is priced per 1,000 tokens. And there's the price is published in Azure. Like each model has different prices. It goes from, I think, 4 cents per 1,000 tokens for the most expensive models to 0.000001 cent per 1,000 tokens for the less capable models. So picking the right model is going to be an important skill to have. So that's Azure AI Studio, and this is getting into OpenAI through Azure.